Radius is the lateral bone of the forearm. It is homologous to the tibia of the lower limb. Like a typical long bone, it is having an upper end, a lower end, and a shaft. The upper end of the radius is cylindrical and disc-like. The lower end has a specific lateral projection termed the styloid process. Apart from this, in the lower end, the anterior surface is smooth and the posterior surface is grooved, having the dorsal tubercle of Lister. The upper end of the radius bone has a head, a neck, and a radial tuberosity. The head of the radius bone is cylindrical and disc-like, having its superior surface in concave orientation for articulation with the capitulum of humerus. At its medial end, it articulates with the radial notch of the ulnar bone. The neck protrudes downwards, and these areas are surrounded by the annular ligament to allow free pivot rotation. The radial tuberosity marks the major insertion for biceps tendon. The shaft of the radius is prismoid, having 3 borders and 3 surfaces. The anterior border begins from the radial tuberosity with its anterior oblique line runs downwards alongside the lateral aspect of the bone. The medial border is the sharpest border. It marks the attachment at its lower third 3/4 part for the interosseous membrane, while the posterior border similarly traces the anterior border but in posterior aspect, having a posterior oblique line running downwards towards the dorsal tubercle of Lister. The 3 surface involves the anterior smooth surface, the lateral smooth surface having roughened areas in its middle aspect, and the posterior surface. The lower end of the radius can be studied as 5 surfaces. The anterior surface is smooth, the lateral surface is smooth and has a projection downwards termed the styloid process. The posterior surface has grooves and indentations. A major one is the dorsal tubercle of Lister, and each of these grooves has specific contents of the extensor compartment. The medial surface is triangular and at the lower end has the ulnar notch. And lastly, the inferior surface has a lateral triangular part for articulation with the scaphoid bone and a medial quadrangular part for articulation with the lunate bone. At the radial tuberosity, in its posterior aspect, there is the insertion for the biceps brachii tendon. Winding around the upper part of the shaft from the posterior aspect and inserting onto the lateral surface is the supinator muscle. From the anterior oblique line, there is the origin for flexor digitorum superficialis. From the anterior surface in the middle aspect alongside the interosseous membrane, there is the origin for flexor pollicis longus. In the lateral surface at the middle, there used to be, in fact there is a posteriorly oriented roughened area for the insertion of pronator teres. At the lower end, the anterior surface provides the insertion for pronator quadratus, and along the lateral aspect, the styloid process provides the insertion to the brachioradialis muscle. From the posterior aspect of the radius, there are the referred inserted fibers of the biceps brachii, pronator teres, and certain aspects of the supinator muscle. Apart from these, in the middle, there is a roughened area. These roughened areas, apart from providing attachment to the interosseous membrane, also provides origin of the adductor pollicis longus and the extensor pollicis brevis. A fall on the outstretched hand will cause damage into the lower aspect of the radius about 2 cm above the lower aspect. At certain instant, the shaft breaks as such, and this could result in dislocation of the detached part either superiorly or inferiorly. If the fractured end is dislocated superiorly, it is termed as Cooley's fracture, and if inferiorly, as Smith's fracture.